Hi, I'm David Lucchino. Welcome to The Dish.
Welcome to The Dish, where we invite entrepreneurs to share their insights into the next generation of biotech companies. I'm Johannes, founder and chairman at Lab Central and CEO of Biolabs. After more than a decade of working with entrepreneurs and supporting more than 1,200 startups, I'm here to bring you stories from our ecosystem. Are you ready to dish? Hello everyone, and welcome back to The Dish. Today, we're excited to be joined by serial biotech entrepreneur and company builder David Lucchino. David is the former CEO and co-founder of Frequency Therapeutics. There, he led the company from inception to IPO. He also chaired MassBio's board, where he co-founded Project Onramp, helping underrepresented students access our life sciences industry. Now CEO of Brenig Therapeutics, a clinical stage Parkinson's company, David brings a wealth of insight on breakthrough science and bold execution. Welcome, David, to The Dish.
Thank you, Johannes. Wonderful to be here.
So before we begin, we ask every one of our guests to bring an orange object. Did you bring us something?
I brought an orange object, proudly.
Let's see it.
So it's very utilitarian, but it's an orange dry erase marker because, you know, as a CEO of biotech companies, as an entrepreneur, you're always memorializing your ideas,
That's right.
but you can't get too wed to them because, you know, our jobs are to solve riddles, and so it's really to show. And I happen to love orange, so we have that in common.
Thank you.
Besides many other things, and you know, it's a good reminder to us that you want to apply both, you know, your institutional knowledge and then your creativity to solve problems, and that requires, you know, iteration after iteration. So this orange dry erase marker really represents that to me. So.
All right, we have to order some
Yes,
for Lab Central.
that's right.
David, you've led companies at very different stages and different business models, modalities, and also disease areas. So what have you learned about staying agile in the industry? What are you applying across these very different companies?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, my career has gone from being working as a professional investor to medtech startup CEO to therapeutic startup CEO. I think in terms of three things that you want to really achieve when you're doing this. You know, you need to be excited about the underlying science. It can't be just a job. It has to be something that you are passionate about because these are really hard problems to solve. I think second, you need to find an initial high quality team, and that's just not people who have the right degrees but have the right approach. You could have the best degree from MIT or Harvard, but if you have somebody in your team that's got a bad attitude or difficult to work with, it doesn't do you any good. So really finding both the competency and the tone and leadership approach is critical. And I think third is sort of accepting that this is not a short-term value proposition. You know, this is going to take years of your professional career to achieve. And so in an odd way, steady wins the race. Mm-hmm. You don't want to get too high, you don't want to get too low. Because inevitably, as you try to solve riddle after riddle, if you will, you know, it's critical that you really keep your wits about you and focus on what matters. Patients, building shareholder value, keeping your investors, you know, close and informed and confident in what you're doing.
That's great. Those will be true for all of your companies.
Yeah, very.
In biotech, things rarely go as planned. Often we work through uncertainty, and so I think since you've done it now many times, right? Like what can you share with our audience? How do you make strategic decisions when data is scarce, or when the market forces you to pivot?
Well, you can. It's a great question. You have to make the best decisions that you know are imperfect strategically at the time, based off of, you know, where you are from a financing cycle, where you are from, you know, a data cycle. And I could think of opportunities where 1 minute I was running a company and I was the lowest of lows, and then I was at the highest of highs. And I'll give you an example. I was in Frequency. I was having IP turf war with a competitor, and they're pretty smart, and they did some things that really almost put us in checkmate. Turns out that I had a concurrent legal battle going with them where we were in court here in state court in Massachusetts. I won't bore you with the details, but I won. So all of a sudden, I didn't give up. I was fighting on another matter that gave me leverage to get the IP access that I needed. That allowed me to then do a deal a big transaction with Astellas Pharmaceuticals. So you as a CEO of these companies, you always need to have optionality as you think about your company. You can't think about it just in a linear, sequential way.
Yeah.
So I didn't exactly know that it would pan out this way, but I did know that I was fighting for what mattered for me, and it sort of came together.
Yeah, as a CEO, you really do have to look around the corner and look ahead while your team is doing the day-to-day. You have to be the one that knows the path.
That's exactly right. Looking around the corner is a great way of putting it. You really have to, and that's as much experience and instinct. I don't think you could really teach that. You can understand you need to do it, but then to do it well is a different skill set.
Looking back at Frequency Therapeutics, it was a bold vision and also high visibility company, right? Like, what did you learn from that? What did you take away? Because sometimes things didn't go as planned, right?
So Frequency Therapeutics was a small molecule. Came out of the Langer lab at MIT, and the premise was your body, every person is born with 15,000 hair cells on each of your cochlea. Mother Nature never anticipated rock concerts and jet airplanes, and so when those hair cells die, because of the shock of the sound that they have to absorb, your hearing declines. That biological system is designed to regenerate itself, but there's no cue to do so. And so what Dr. Langer had figured out in his lab in another part of the body was how to sort of cue that that terminally differentiated, state, if you will. It was designed to do this. And we got some really early exciting data, double-blinded, placebo-controlled. In fact, I did a phase 1 safety study as a double-blinded, placebo-controlled study because I'm looking for any edge I can get. I didn't know what I would get. And we saw some really nice results where people whose hearing were improved. And then we interviewed them. And we interviewed their audiologists. So we really believed the data was real. That data allowed us to do a deal with Astellas and take the company public. Where we sort of fell down and scraped our knee was at the phase 2 level, where we were now doing not 40 patients, but we're doing 170 patients, and really navigating issues around the placebo effect. Is somebody really hearing their hearing improve, if you will? And we knew the drug worked, but it was really being able to approach that, looking back, in a way where all our assumptions about clinical studies you didn't need to throw them out the window, but they need to be put aside. You're doing a clinical study for the first time in patients who have sensory neurohearing loss. Don't let your assumptions get in your way of how to do that. And I think that was probably the biggest learning for me. We ran the clinical study. It's not that we got it wrong, we just didn't get it right the way it needed to get right. And as a drug developer yourself, I think you may understand what that means.
So clinical trial design, especially in a new area, right?
New area. And listen, there's a lot of confident people in our industry, and that's wonderful. But when you're doing something that's so novel, you need to almost step back, put your confidence to the side, and recognize, I know what I know, but I need to know what I don't know, if you will.
Yeah.
And that's where I think, CBS Morning News did a profile on one of our patients. The patient's hearing got better. His audiologist was on tape saying, listen, this patient's, no one's hearing ever gets better. His hearing got better. I can't prove it was the drug that Frequency had, but I don't know what else it could be. So we knew we were onto something, and that was the hardest part, was you could taste, what you could do for patients, but then you missed on your clinical study, and then, at that point, it becomes a different management game.
Yeah. Very interesting experience and story. Many entrepreneurs in biotech talk about the fail fast mentality, but of course in our field, failure can be very expensive and very public, right? So it's painful and people avoid it. So how do you now navigate through that decision making with your board, with your stakeholders?
Well, I think And particularly in this environment where I think, capital is so precious. Capital is always precious, but it can ebb and flow. I think even promising companies that are struggling to show proof of concept like they had promised or like they thought they could deliver are in real danger, and that would be an example of failing fast in this environment. There's a paradox. I get to work with some of the smartest men and women in the world. I mean, top of their class, and you name it. MIT, Harvard, University of California, Berkeley. But perfection isn't the game that we're in. It's solving problems and riddles. And so, what I try to do is before I even get to a place of where I'm starting to take money, do I have the team that's adaptable and flexible enough that I think can work with me to solve these problems? And then if that team doesn't meet the expectations or the technology is just being difficult, I think you need to look each other in the eye and call it what it is. And that's okay too. Not what any of us hope for, but it's okay.
Yeah. So often, people think, oh, biotech, you're making science and you're making a business out of it. But the reality is, in many cases, it's a setback and you have to pivot, right? And how do you keep your board appraised of the bad news that you may have in the lab? Like, how do you navigate that? You're now an experienced CEO.
Well, I have a specific example, but what I'd say to everybody is the fastest way to lose your job as a CEO is to have a problem and not also have a solution, or to your board. To call up your board chair, your board members, and say, listen, we didn't get the data that we wanted, we're all disappointed. Okay, that happens, but what are you going to do about it?
Yep.
And so I had a situation where a company that I started with Dr. Langer and another gentleman, Chris Luce, we had started, it was designed to come up with antimicrobial peptides, maybe, 12 to 14 amino acids long, tethered to the surface of medical devices that could do broad spectrum killing, gram-negative, gram-positive. And it worked beautifully in the lab, and it worked beautifully in saline. But as soon as you introduce complex media like proteins and other things in blood, those would lie down and create a blanket over your killing mechanisms, and they wouldn't work. And we realized that about, 2 months after closing a Series A from 5AM Ventures and others. And so what I did with Chris and the team is we knew of another technology in the Langer lab that was a non-fouling technology. The US government had put a lot of money into coating that you could put on submarines to stop marine life from attaching to it. And we said, whoa, can this be applied to medical devices? So we hustled, we got an option on the technology from the University of Washington, where the visiting professor at the Langer lab was originally from, and we brought that in. And we wound up taking that to the promised land. We got FDA approval on a catheter where it was modified on the inside and the outside to stop thrombus, which was the real issue with these PICC line catheters. And then we got the company transacted successfully and made our investors, in 2012, a respectable amount of money considering the environment.
Yeah, that's great. So the quick pivot, the realization of a problem and then trying to find a solution for it, even outside of the field.
That's
Ship
right.
fouling, I love that.
Yeah.
Like bring the submarine
Who
coating
knew?
to
That's
the
right.
medical catheter.
That's right.
Awesome. Yeah. At this point in your career, David, how has your leadership style evolved to adapt to the market and the needs that investors have for capital efficiency?
Yeah.
Is that factoring in for you?
Well, it's a critical question. Anybody can take on the role of a CEO, but not anyone can do it well and effectively. And I think a big part of doing it well is your leadership style and approach. I think that, no matter if you have a scientific background or not, your job is to create a high-performing, high-functioning team that can address, the matters at hand. It's not to be the smartest person in the room. It's to get the right people in the room, to ask the right questions at the right time. And so I think the way you do that is really twofold. Transparency, directness, accountability, but a culture where people feel that they can thrive. And each culture is different that I've been part of, but I think a common denominator is people feel like they're respected, I'm not hiding information from them, I'm over communicating, but I'm also holding people accountable in a public way. okay, Tom or Sue, you're responsible for this. We're all going to get back together in a week, and we need to see, that work.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to be, everybody wants to be at their best for their peers. And so running it as a peer sort of driven environment. And the way I talk about it, Johannes, is like 70% of the time it's a meritocracy. 30% of the time it's not, you're the CEO and you have to make compensation issues, hiring, firing issues, deal with the board. But that's kind of how I've come to understand it, to be an effective CEO.
And now I understand you're running Brenig Therapeutics, more or less like a virtual company or a very lean company for the stage that you guys are at.
Yeah, it's great. It's the nature of our times. I'm used to starting companies and you have 5 or 10 core people. Here we have 2 full-time employees, myself and the chief medical officer, and then we have 9, consultants, advisors who had been with the company prior to me and were part of the building of the initial. It was a venture created entity between OrbiMed and a group called Torrey Pines Investment, and so this group had been working on it for a number of years. They wanted a CEO to come in and help evolve the company. But it's a great team of people. But we're not going to be hiring any full-time employees, certainly within the next 6 months or even 12 months. We're going to really keep it lean and mean and very adaptable to what we need to achieve in the nature of the market.
You're already in phase 2 now, or entering phase 2.
We're going to be doing. We finished a phase 1 study, just wrapping that up in Australia. We'll probably maybe do a phase 1B study to really help us get ready for our phase 2, which would be kicking off sometime the second half of 26, I would guess.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So David, I want to pivot and talk a little bit about Project Onramp that you co-founded as chair of Mass Bio. It's an organization that opens the doors for students into biotech that wouldn't otherwise probably have access. Why did you think that was important?
Yeah, there's a little bit of context. Mass Bio is sort of the largest trade association here in Massachusetts for the life sciences and one of the leaders throughout the country by the nature of the importance of Kendall Square to our industry. A couple thousand members. So it was a real honor to be chair of Mass Bio. And when you hold these positions, what I try to do is like, how can I do something that otherwise may not have been established? And I kept rolling around in my head, if I lost my job tomorrow, I know a lot of people and it would be hard for me to get a job in this industry. It would take a lot of work. I could do it. But if you didn't know anybody and you're living out in Springfield, Massachusetts or Worcester, where you're not tied into the life science community, how do you get tied in? Because there are talented students come from underserved communities. How do we sort of connect the dots? And so through my chair position, I convened a number of key people. The Mass Life Science Center and Travis McCready at the time, Life Science Cares, which was Sarah McDonald, and Bob Coughlin was the CEO of Mass Bio at the time, and a group called Bottom Up, which works with disadvantaged students. And we all came together and came up with this idea of Project Onramp. Let's give people a foot in the door, assuming they've showed the right, the right chutzpah, if you will, to compete for these jobs. So fast forward 5 or 6 years, we're now in San Diego, Philadelphia, New York City, Boston, and expanding. And I think it's worked because the name itself lets you know it's a chance for you to get into something. And it's one of those things like I don't even know the people that this has impacted, but it's exciting to me, like helping patients, to know that people's lives and trajectories have changed because of something that I was a part of. And that fundamentally gets to the core of who I am and why I do what I do.
That's great. And what a great initiative that's now nationwide and started right here in Kendall Square.
That's right, and a lot of kudos to Life Science Cares. They really took this idea and ran with it. But I had the honor of being there at the beginning and helping to kick it off.
Congratulations!
Yeah,
awesome.
thank you.
That's a big impact. A question that we always like to ask our guests at the end of the interview is sort of looking back. Now you're an experienced serial entrepreneur. Looking back, and that's a career that many people aspire to in our industry. Looking back at yourself, like, is there a piece of advice that you would give young David, or the younger
Yeah.
peers that are entering the industry from the perspective that you now have?
Yeah, entrepreneurship is uncertain, and it can even be scary at times. But it's a hell of an exciting career. And my advice is, I got into it maybe when I was about 30, but I shouldn't have been so timid. I mean, there's nobody's knocking on my door saying, David, I want you to start this company. You kind of have to go out and take the initiative and start to meet people, and put your ideas together, and then the second part of that is then how do you start to coalesce capital, and you get to meet private investors, individuals that may like to do this, that can then ultimately lead you to more professional investors. So my advice to young David is don't be afraid, go do it, and who knows what's going to happen, but it's a lot better than not doing it.
That's great.
So that's what I would say.
That's great advice. Thank you so much, David,
Thank you, Johannes,
for joining us.
Thank you for all you do.
Thank you for that interview, and thank you all for tuning into The Dish, and I hope we'll see you next time for our next episode.